All right, welcome in everyone. Today we're going deep on Lance Armstrong. You sent us this ESPN 30 for 30 documentary, Lance, and well, honestly, it's a wild ride. We're going to be unpacking his rise to the top, his dramatic fall, and kind of everything in between.
It's a story that really kind of captures the highs and lows of ambition
Yeah.
and also like the ethical dilemmas that come when you try to achieve greatness.
Yeah, and the documentary doesn't shy away from the tough questions,
Yeah.
like how did Armstrong get to be so successful and what made him go down the path of doping?
Well, to understand that, we kind of have to go back to the beginning.
Mm.
The film goes all the way back to his childhood in Plano, Texas.
Yeah.
And even as a kid, Armstrong had this incredible drive to win, just this, relentless competitive spirit. There's actually this scene where his mom talks about how he wouldn't even let his own grandmother win at checkers. I mean, it really paints a picture of his personality early on.
Sounds like that competitive fire was there from the get-go. And that drive definitely carried him through his early athletic career. First with swimming and triathlons.
Right, and by 21, he was already a world champion cyclist. That 1993 win was like a huge turning point. It really put him on the map.
So he was already, a rising star in the cycling world. Then in 1996, he was diagnosed with advanced testicular cancer. I can only imagine how devastating that must have been.
Absolutely, and the documentary really lays out just how serious it was. I mean, the cancer had spread to his lungs and brain. He went through, grueling rounds of chemotherapy and surgery. It was a real fight for his life.
From what I've heard, the documentary doesn't sugarcoat those treatments at all.
It definitely doesn't.
Mm.
There are some pretty graphic scenes that really give you a sense of what he went through, but it also showcases his incredible resilience. He faced cancer head on with that same determination that he brought to his sport.
It's a testament to the human spirit, that ability to overcome even the toughest challenges. And it makes his comeback to cycling all the more incredible, I mean.
You're absolutely right. In 1999, he not only returned to pro cycling, but he also won the Tour de France. It was a truly inspiring comeback story.
And he didn't stop there. He ended up winning the Tour de France 7 times in a row.
Exactly. And for those who don't know, the Tour de France is considered, the most prestigious and grueling cycling race in the world. It's a multi-stage race that lasts for weeks and covers thousands of miles, with incredibly challenging terrain. So winning it even once is a huge accomplishment, let alone 7 times in a row.
Mm.
He became like a global icon, a symbol of hope and resilience for millions of people.
So at this point, he's, on top of the world. He's beaten cancer. He's a champion athlete. And he's inspiring people all over the globe. But this is where the story takes a turn, right?
Yeah, this is where the whispers of doping start to come up. And it's important to understand the context of pro cycling at the time. Doping was pretty widespread, and some even considered it like a necessary evil to compete at the highest level.
The documentary talks about Dr. Michael Ferrari, who was Armstrong's trainer. And he was a controversial figure linked to doping practices with other cyclists.
Right, and there's also Betsy Andre, the wife of Frankie Andre, who was one of Armstrong's teammates, and she became like a key voice raising concerns about doping within Armstrong's inner circle.
It sounds like there are red flags popping up all around him.
There were, but for years, Armstrong completely denied any doping. He maintained his innocence and fought back against anyone who accused him. The documentary even includes footage from that time. And it's interesting to see how he, deflects questions and attacks the credibility of anyone who dared to challenge him.
And it wasn't just accusations, to compete at that level. Cyclists were already pushing their bodies to the absolute limit. But the documentary highlights how some athletes, just driven by this pressure to win, turn to, performance-enhancing drugs like EPO.
For those who may not know, EPO, or erythropoietin, it's a hormone that boosts red blood cell production, which in turn, increases oxygen carrying capacity. It was a popular doping method in cycling because it could significantly improve endurance.
So it was, basically giving athletes an unfair advantage. It sounds like the documentary gets into those methods to, give viewers a better understanding of what was happening behind the scenes.
It does, and it also touches on the lengths that some athletes went to, including Armstrong and his team, to avoid detection. They used sophisticated masking techniques, and they even went so far as to intimidate and discredit those who tried to expose them.
Wow, it sounds like a very complex and murky world.
It was. And for a long time, Armstrong was able to keep up his image of invincibility. But you know what they say? The truth has a way of coming out.
And that brings us to 2013, when Armstrong finally sat down with Oprah Winfrey and confessed on camera to using performance-enhancing drugs. throughout his entire
What
career.
a shocking confession that, like, really sent shockwaves through the sporting world and beyond.
I bet. It must have been a wild moment to watch.
It was, and the documentary captures the rawness of that interview, the weight of his confession,
Yeah.
and the immediate fallout that happened afterwards.
So what happened next? How did the world react?
Well, the consequences were swift and severe. He was stripped of all 7 of his Tour de France titles, received a lifetime ban from cycling, and lost a lot of major sponsorships.
A complete fall from grace.
It really is, and the Livestrong Foundation, the cancer charity he founded, which had become a global symbol of hope, was also, like, deeply affected by all of this.
It's incredible how quickly everything unraveled, from hero to villain, practically overnight. But the documentary doesn't just stop there, does it? It goes deeper, exploring, like, the psychology and emotional aspects of Armstrong's story.
Exactly, and that's what makes this so compelling. It's not just a, recap of events. It's a study of character, motivation, and the consequences of choices made under pressure.
So we've covered a lot already, from his childhood, his early wins, his battle with cancer, and his meteoric rise in cycling. But we've also seen the dark side, the doping, the lies, and his downfall. Where do we go from here? What else does the documentary uncover about Lance Armstrong?
Well, next time we'll dig into the documentary's exploration of Armstrong's personality, his drive, and his willingness to push boundaries, even if it meant crossing ethical lines.
Sounds like we're just getting started. Stick around because this is about to get even more interesting.
So we've seen how Armstrong went from a promising cyclist to, like, a global icon. But like we talked about, that image was built on, lies.
It's interesting how the documentary goes deeper than the headlines and tries to understand the man, the man behind all the hype.
Right. And one thing that really stood out to me was how the film portrays Armstrong's focus on winning, Like it was this all-consuming force. It kind of overshadowed everything else.
Yeah, there's that scene where they show him, training even after his cancer diagnosis. And you can just see that intensity. It's kind of unsettling.
It is, and the documentary suggests that this win-at-all-costs mindset
Yeah.
might be what led him to doping.
Makes you wonder if he even enjoyed the sport or if it was just about, conquering, about being the best no matter what.
That's a question the documentary leaves you with. It presents all these different perspectives on his motivation. Some people say that his cancer battle fueled his drive,
Yeah.
that he wanted to, prove his strength and resilience.
And others saw it as just, pure ambition, this ruthless pursuit of victory that made him blind to, the ethical side of things.
Exactly. And the film doesn't shy away from showing the impact his choices had on the people around him.
You mean his teammates, like Frankie Andre, whose wife Betsy was really outspoken about the doping.
Yeah, and others who were either involved in the doping or felt pressure to go along with it to, stay on the team. The documentary shows the tough choices they faced. Loyalty versus integrity.
It must have been so hard for them to speak out against Armstrong. He was not just their teammate, but a powerful figure in the sport.
Totally. And the film explores how Armstrong used his power to silence critics, to
Yeah.
protect his image. There are interviews with journalists who looked into the doping allegations,
Yeah.
and they talk about, like, the intimidation tactics,
Yeah.
the legal threats, and even the smear campaigns.
It shows how far someone will go to protect their reputation, even when they know the truth is coming out.
Right, and it's not just about the impact on cycling. The documentary looks at Armstrong's personal relationships, too, with his family, friends, and romantic partners. It shows how his drive for success and the pressure to be perfect affected his relationships.
I remember reading about his strained relationship with his son, Luke. Does the documentary address that?
It does. It shows how Luke struggled to, like, reconcile the image of his dad as this hero, the cancer survivor, with the reality of his lies.
That must have been so tough for him.
Yeah, it speaks to the broader impact of, Armstrong's actions. It wasn't just cycling. It was his personal life, his family, his whole legacy.
It shows that our actions have consequences. They affect those around us in ways we might not even realize.
And speaking of legacy, one thing the doc explores is, the impact the doping scandal had on cycling itself.
That's a good point. It wasn't just about Armstrong. It was a wake-up call for the whole sport.
Exactly. Armstrong's confession forced cycling to face its problems, to admit that performance enhancement was a real issue.
So, in a way, his downfall led to some positive changes.
Yeah, in some ways. It led to stricter testing and a renewed focus on, clean competition and ethical behavior.
But it also hurt the sport's reputation, right? It made people question past wins and cast a shadow on current athletes.
It did, and it's a question that's still there. Can cycling ever escape the shadow of Armstrong?
It's a complicated legacy. He did incredible things on the bike, inspired people with his cancer story, but it was all built on lies.
And the documentary deals with that. It shows
hmm
the good and the bad, the inspiring and the bad, and it lets the viewer decide what they think.
It doesn't tell you what to think, just gives you the facts, the different sides, and lets you decide where you stand.
Exactly. And that's what I like about it. It's not just, hero to villain. It's a complex look at a complex person.
Hmm.
And it makes you think about that complexity.
It seems like the film is asking big questions about ambition, the cost of success, and forgiveness.
It definitely does. And those questions go beyond cycling. They're questions we can all relate to.
So where does the documentary go from here? Does it show anything about Armstrong's life after the confession? Has he found any redemption?
Well, in the last part, we'll see how the documentary portrays Armstrong's attempts to, come to terms with his past and find a way forward.
I'm curious to see what they show. It's one thing to admit your mistakes, but it's another to rebuild your life and move on.
It's a process, and the documentary shows the challenges of that.
Sounds like we have a lot more to talk about. Stay with us for the final part of our deep dive into Lance Armstrong. We've talked about, the rise and fall of Lance Armstrong from his early days as this, determined athlete to his confession and everything that came after. But what about life after all that? After the confession?
That's something the documentary really spends time on, exploring whether someone like him can actually, find redemption after achieving so much through lying.
So does it show anything about Armstrong's life, since then?
Yeah, it does. It shows him trying to rebuild, dealing with the consequences,
Right.
and coming to terms with his past. He talks about how his choices affected, his family, his friends, the sport.
One thing that really got to me was that scene where he's talking to his son, Luke. It seems like he's really sorry,
Yeah.
really feeling the weight of what he did, the hurt he caused.
It's a powerful scene. It shows a different side of Armstrong. The documentary doesn't excuse him or anything, but it shows him admitting the pain he caused, especially to those close to him.
It's like he's trying to, I don't know, make sense of all these different versions of himself. The cancer survivor, the champ, the liar, the father trying to fix things.
Exactly, and the doc doesn't give easy answers. It makes you wonder, can someone who got to the top by lying, can they ever really be redeemed?
It's a question that goes way beyond Armstrong. It makes you think about, our own capacity for good and bad, and forgiveness, second chances, all that.
What did you think about how they presented these different viewpoints?
Well, one thing I noticed was how they used interviews with Armstrong, his family, teammates, critics, journalists, everyone. It creates this really complex picture of him.
Yeah, it's fascinating. You see these glimpses into his mind,
Yeah.
his motivations, but they don't try to tell you what to think.
Right. It feels objective. You get to decide for yourself about his character, whether he deserves forgiveness.
It really makes you think, and I think that's what's so great about this deep dive. It goes deeper than the headlines, deeper than just hero and villain. It makes us think about human nature, ethical choices, redemption, even after, a huge fall from grace.
So after all this, what do you think are the biggest takeaways from Armstrong's story?
For me, it's that success achieved through lying. It's empty,
Mm.
it doesn't last.
And that even people we admire can have a dark side. We can't just blindly believe everything we see.
Yeah, and it shows how dangerous it is to,
hmm
always want to win no matter what. We need to balance ambition with integrity and hold each other accountable.
It's a story that's still relevant today, because it's about things we all deal with. Ambition, deceit, redemption. It makes us ask tough questions about ourselves and the choices we make.
Well said. And I think Armstrong's story isn't finished. People will keep talking about it, analyzing it for years to come.
And it gives us a chance to reflect, What did you take away from it? How does it change your view of success, failure, chasing your dreams? Something to think about as you figure out your own path. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.